Welcome to African Folktales by Mozzie. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification. Hear me well, and listen carefully, for this is a tale that happens more than you think, though few speak of it. There was a woman, gentle as the morning breeze, and she was married to a man who smiled and spoke as if the world belonged to him. Yet, from the very first day of their union, she learned a bitter truth: she was married to him. But she was never the wife. It happened quietly, like a shadow creeping over the floor, unnoticed until it was too late. People passing by would say, "What a happy couple!" They would not see the other woman, the one who carried his laughter, who held his secrets, who shared his joy before the bride could even speak. She sat in the same house, slept in the same bed, and yet, somehow, she was invisible. This woman had learned to be silent from her mother, who said, "A good woman does not shout. A good woman does not demand. A good woman carries her heart in her chest and lets no one see it break." So she endured, day after day, smiling while her husband's attention drifted away from her. She endured until the day came when patience could not save her, when silence became a prison, and when the life she had imagined vanished like mist at sunrise. But before we reach that day, before the silence broke, we must go back to where it began. When she first met him, when hope was still alive, and when no one could have imagined the storm that waited ahead. She met him in a bustling city market, where the air smelled of spices and roasted yams. He was tall, handsome, and carried himself like a man who was used to being admired. She noticed him at once. There was something about the way he spoke, the way people listened when he laughed, that drew her in. But there was also another. A woman who called herself his best friend, who laughed easily, who walked into every space as if she belonged there. The man introduced her carefully, smiling, saying, "She is like my sister. Nothing will ever happen between us." The woman nodded, smiling, though her heart trembled. Something told her that these words were only a shield, not a promise. The best friend was always near. She shared advice, shared jokes, shared secrets. Sometimes the bride noticed the way he would smile at her friend, not like he smiled at her, but differently, warmly, deeply. She told herself to be patient, that love would draw lines, that marriage would protect her heart. She did not know that silence could be so dangerous, that a quiet heart can be mistaken for weakness, and that the space she left for peace would slowly be filled by another. She had been taught to endure. Her mother's words echoed in her ears: "A woman who is too loud cannot survive. A quiet woman can endure anything." And so she endured, at work, at home, in the spaces where people demanded more than they gave. She swallowed her anger when her colleagues blamed her for mistakes, and she swallowed her sorrow when her husband smiled at the other woman in her home. At first, she believed love would protect her. She believed that being gentle and kind, calm and forgiving, would make him see her worth. But the other woman was loud, confident, free. She laughed in the way the quiet woman could not, and the man's eyes followed her naturally, as if the bride were only a shadow in the same room. Every day, she reminded herself that peace was stronger than conflict. Every day, she carried the weight of a marriage that was full in name, empty in reality. Every night, she prayed for a moment where she could be chosen, where her voice would matter. But the days passed, and she learned that silence, even when taught as a virtue, can sometimes be a trap. The wedding was celebrated with drums and songs, with people dancing and shouting blessings. Yet even on that day, the shadow of the other woman loomed. She stood beside him during the vows, smiling proudly, whispering encouragement into his ear. Guests whispered, "She is so perfect for him," and no one corrected them. Even as the bride walked down the aisle in white, everyone's eyes seemed to linger on the other woman. After the wedding, the pattern began. She prepared meals, planned the home, and greeted guests with a smile. He arrived late from work, sometimes with gifts, sometimes empty-handed, and the other woman was there, always. She sat in the living room, relaxed, confident. People assumed she lived there. Some even called her his real wife. And the quiet bride, she smiled. She told herself that patience would fix it, that love would set things right, but the other woman was a force. And the bride's silence taught her husband a dangerous lesson: he could care for her without ever needing to choose her. The first real crack came on a day meant for celebration. It was his birthday. She had prepared a small dinner, candles flickering, his favorite dishes, a gift wrapped with care. She waited, heart full of hope. When he came, he smiled, but his eyes went to the other woman, who had appeared suddenly, saying she had forgotten her own plans and needed company. He left with her, laughing. The bride held the gift in her hands, quiet, silent, invisible. That night, she realized she was married to him. But she was never the wife. It was a small moment, yet it broke something inside her. From that day forward, she would learn that silence could no longer protect her, and that endurance alone could not save her heart. She had to find her voice, or lose herself entirely. After that night, the quiet bride's life became a delicate balance. She moved through her home like a shadow, careful not to disturb the rhythm that everyone else seemed to follow. Her husband spoke kindly when he remembered her, yet his laughter and attention often wandered to the other woman. People assumed it was harmless, but the pain settled deep in her chest. The other woman came uninvited often. She found excuses: work meetings, shared errands, casual visits, and each time she entered, the husband's eyes brightened. She would sit on the sofa, feet tucked under her, drinking tea he had prepared, while the bride offered nothing but a polite smile. Guests whispered, "She's so close to him," and he never contradicted them. The bride tried to remind herself of her own worth. She had been quiet, yes, but not weak. She was capable, caring, and loyal. She cooked the meals he loved, she kept the house in order, and she carried the burdens he ignored. But loyalty alone was not enough to make a man see you when his heart had already wandered. One afternoon, she discovered something that nearly crushed her. A message on his phone, a simple note from the other woman, filled with laughter and secrets meant for her eyes only. He smiled at it, read it aloud, and then placed the phone back on the table as if it were nothing. She felt a quiet rage swell inside her, but she did not speak. She learned long ago that speaking only invited conflict, and conflict, she had been taught, was dangerous for a woman. So she waited. And while she waited, she observed. Every gesture, every laugh, every glance between them was etched into her memory. She noticed how his hand lingered a second longer on hers, how he whispered inside jokes to her friend that she could not hear. She learned that endurance alone could not protect her heart. And yet, she waited, because leaving had never crossed her mind. Weeks passed, and small kindnesses from her husband came like flickers of sunlight in a storm. A message, a smile, a small gift, tiny reminders that he noticed her presence, even if briefly. She clung to them, hoping they meant more, that maybe he would see her after all, but the other woman never left. She appeared at dinners, sometimes offering to help, sometimes claiming she wanted to visit. The bride would nod, smiling, hiding the hurt that tightened her chest. She had long learned to hide pain, for showing it only invited ridicule or pity, neither of which she wanted. One evening, as she prepared a simple dinner, she watched him approach the door, and her hope rose. He paused, his gaze softening, and for a moment she imagined the life she had dreamed of: laughter, love, partnership. But then, the other woman stepped from the car, waving, her hair catching the light, her smile bright. His face lit up. Her hope dimmed. The bride served the food in silence. He laughed and shared stories, not with her, but with the woman beside him. Every word, every glance, reminded her that she existed in the shadows of their world. Still, she ate quietly, swallowing tears with each bite. She had learned that sometimes the hardest battles were fought without words, and her silence had become both shield and chain. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She understood now that love alone could not guarantee respect. That loyalty without recognition was a cruel thing. And deep inside, a question began to grow. How long would she endure before the silence destroyed her entirely? Months passed, and the pattern continued. She learned to notice the subtle signs of betrayal, the way he smiled at her friend, the way he shared secrets, the way he forgot to acknowledge her efforts. Guests complimented the other woman openly. Her husband laughed along. And still, the bride stayed quiet, obedient, gentle. At work, she had learned to endure as well. Extra tasks, misplaced blame, endless expectations, she carried it all. She believed that her strength lay in patience, her power in quietness. But at home, her endurance was no longer enough. Her husband's affection had a map, and she was not on it. She was merely a placeholder, a witness, a shadow of what could have been. Then came a moment that shifted everything. He brought the other woman a gift, a bouquet of flowers, sparkling jewelry, and a note that read, "To the one who truly understands me," her own gift. A carefully chosen necklace lay unopened on the table. His explanation. He laughed. "It's nothing serious. Just a joke." The bride understood then what she had known quietly all along. She was married, yes, but she was never the wife. She had been living in a marriage where her voice did not matter, where her heart was ignored, and where another woman occupied the space she had been promised. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow. Not for the gifts, not for the laughter, but for the life she had imagined, a life stolen by silence, patience, and the false comfort of obedience. She realized that if she did not act, she would vanish entirely, leaving only memories of a quiet woman who endured too long. Her first real act of courage was small. A simple dinner prepared with care. She lit candles and cooked his favorite dishes, hoping to remind him of the life they were meant to share. She did not shout, did not demand, did not protest. She only created a space for them, a moment of intimacy, a chance for recognition. But when he arrived, she saw the other woman first. He smiled, yes, but the warmth in his eyes was for her friend. He said she had been busy and needed company. The bride's chest tightened. The candles flickered. She realized then that creating space was not enough. She could cook, she could wait, she could endure, but her efforts would never be noticed if he had already decided to love another. She spoke softly, asking if they could eat together. He waved her off, saying it was nothing serious. The other woman sat, smiling, claiming her place with ease. Guests might have called it friendship. She called it betrayal. For the first time, she questioned everything. Her patience, her silence, her belief that marriage would protect her. She realized that endurance, when mistaken for weakness, could be deadly. And still, she stayed. She stayed because leaving was unthinkable. That night, she lay awake, thinking about the years ahead. She had been trained to endure, to avoid conflict, to carry burdens quietly. But she understood now that endurance without recognition is not strength, is invisibility. She felt the first spark of anger, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and powerful. She made a decision then. Silence had protected her, yes, but it had also betrayed her. If she did not speak, if she did not act, the life she had imagined, the woman she wanted to be, would disappear entirely, and so began her journey. A journey of quiet courage, slow-burning strength, and the fight to reclaim what should have been hers from the beginning. The days grew heavier, and the quiet bride began noticing patterns she had once ignored. The other woman was no longer just a presence, she was part of the rhythm of the house. She appeared at breakfast, at lunch, at dinners the bride had painstakingly prepared. Every smile, every joke shared between them, chipped away at the bride's patience. One evening, she watched as her husband handed the other woman a small gift he had picked out himself. He laughed at something she had said, his eyes soft, affectionate, as if she were the only one in the room. The bride held back a scream, her hands trembling. Her mind raced. All this time, he had shared his heart elsewhere, and she had been blind. She remembered the stories her mother told her as a child, stories of women who endured, who were silent, who carried the weight of a man's life in their hearts. Her mother had said, a woman's strength is in patience, but now she wondered if patience alone could protect a heart from being crushed. If she stayed quiet, she would lose herself entirely. That night, she poured herself a cup of tea and stared out the window, imagining a life where she could speak, where she could demand respect, where she could reclaim her place. She knew she had to make a choice, continue to be the shadow, the quiet observer, or step forward and fight for the life she deserved. She did not know it yet, but the days ahead would force her to choose. And once the choice was made, there would be no turning back. The first confrontation arrived quietly, like a storm hidden behind the clouds. She had prepared dinner, as always, hoping for a moment of shared peace. He arrived with a smile, and the other woman followed, claiming that she had just dropped by. The bride's hand shook as she set the plates on the table. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "This is for us. I mean, our dinner," she said softly. He glanced at her, then at the other woman, and laughed. "Oh, don't worry. She can join. It's just a small meal," he said. Her heart clenched. She realized then that her presence alone was not enough. She was invisible in her own home, a silent participant in her own life. The other woman's laughter filled the space, and he leaned closer, listening, smiling, completely unaware of the pain he was causing. That night, she went to bed with a tight chest and a quiet rage. Her mind replayed every slight, every ignored gift, every unacknowledged effort she had endured. And for what? She realized the lesson she had been avoiding. Silence had been her undoing. To survive, she had to speak, even if her voice shook. The following days brought small victories and painful reminders. At work, she began to assert herself. She corrected errors that were not hers. She refused extra tasks she could not handle. Colleagues stared, some annoyed, some quietly impressed. She smiled softly, knowing that she was beginning to reclaim a piece of herself. At home, the battle was not as simple. The other woman continued to invade the space, laughing at jokes meant only for him. He remained oblivious, comfortable, careless. She tried small acts of courage, interrupting conversations, asking questions, seeking acknowledgement. Each time, he dismissed her softly, saying, "It's nothing serious. Don't worry." Her anger grew quietly. She did not shout, she did not scream. She simply observed, memorizing every detail, every laugh, every glance that proved she was second in her own marriage. She realized that endurance could only protect the body, not the heart. And the heart, she discovered, could break quietly, slowly, until it was almost impossible to repair. One afternoon, she received a message from a friend, a reminder of who she once was. Someone who laughed freely, who spoke her mind, who did not endure silently. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the quiet woman who had carried so much pain in silence. Her hands were trembling, her chest tight, but a spark of courage began to burn. She understood that change required action. Silence had protected her before, yes, but now it threatened to destroy her completely. She had to speak, even if it meant losing the life she thought she had, even if it meant anger, confrontation, and chaos. The decision was terrifying, yet freeing. She would no longer wait for acknowledgement. She would no longer accept second place. She would demand the respect and recognition she deserved, or she would leave. The first real test of her courage arrived unexpectedly. It was an anniversary she had quietly marked on her calendar, a day meant for celebration. She prepared a candlelit dinner, cooking dishes she knew he loved. She hoped that this one night he would see her, but when he arrived, the other woman was already there. His arm rested comfortably around her, as if the bride were invisible. She felt her chest tighten, her hands shaking. The dinner she had prepared was ignored, the candles unnoticed. She realized then that hope without action was a trap. For the first time, she spoke clearly, softly but firmly. "I prepared this for us. For you and me. Not for her." He laughed, trying to wave it off. "Don't worry. It's nothing serious," he said. The other woman smiled, amused, as if she were entitled to the space. Her patience had ended. The quiet bride, once invisible, now understood the truthfully. If she did not fight for herself, no one would. And in that moment, the fire within her grew. She would no longer remain a shadow in her own life. The anniversary night was a turning point. She had tried quietly to reclaim her place, but he had laughed, pretending nothing mattered. That night, she made a decision. Silence would no longer protect her. She would speak, and if her words caused storms, she would face them. She cleared the table, her hands steady now, and said, "This ends tonight. You must choose, me or her." His face went pale, as if her words had hit him physically. He opened his mouth, tried to laugh, but she did not allow it. Her voice was firm, quiet, yet sharp, like a blade. The other woman froze. She had never seen the bride speak with such strength. She had assumed that the quiet woman would always yield, that her patience would never turn into power. Now, she realized the game was changing. He hesitated. "It's not like that," he stammered. "I love you. Love." She echoed, voice calm but deadly. "If you loved me, you wouldn't share your heart with her. If you loved me, you would have seen me when I cried silently. But you didn't, and I can't stay silent anymore." The other woman smiled faintly, eyes gleaming. She thought she had already won. But the bride did not care. She was no longer waiting for permission to exist. She had found her voice. And once found, it could not be silenced. The days that followed were unbearable. He avoided her, unsure how to respond to the new woman in the house, the one who no longer whispered but spoke with authority. The other woman tried to insert herself again, smiling, teasing, claiming familiarity. But the bride stood firm. She began documenting everything: the dinners, the gifts, the laughter, the betrayals. She wrote down every slight, every ignored effort, every time she had been second. Writing it down made the pain sharper, but it also made her stronger. She could no longer deny the truth. She had been a shadow in her own marriage. One afternoon, she received a call that shook her to her core. He was gone, with the other woman, and had blocked her from contacting him. Panic rose, but she did not cry. She knew now that she could not depend on him for recognition or love. If she wanted justice, she would have to act alone. The fire inside her burned brighter. The woman who had endured quietly was gone. In her place stood a woman who would fight, who would reclaim her life, and who would no longer be invisible. The quiet life she had led was shattered. Friends noticed the change. She no longer flinched at jokes, no longer endured insults at work, no longer smiled politely while hiding pain. She spoke firmly, corrected errors, refused to be ignored. At home, she took control of her environment. She refused to be interrupted, demanded space, and set boundaries. The husband was shocked, the other woman surprised. They had assumed she would always yield. They had assumed silence was weakness. They were wrong. The bride, once gentle and soft, now radiated quiet power. She was not loud, but every word carried weight. Every glance demanded respect. She had discovered a truth that her mother had never warned her about. Endurance was not strength when it allowed others to take everything. Then came the night that changed everything. He returned home, expecting the usual quiet, obedient wife. Instead, he found her standing, tall, unafraid, and glaring. She said nothing at first, just let him see her. "You have hurt me," she finally spoke, her voice calm but icy. "You have loved another woman while I waited, hoped, and endured. You have taken everything from me, and now, I will not allow it to continue. This marriage is over unless you choose me fully, and even then, trust will take years to rebuild." He tried to speak, but she interrupted. "I will not beg. I will not plead. I am not your shadow. You have made your choices. Now I make mine, for the first time." He saw her not as a quiet wife, not as someone he could ignore, but as a woman who had grown wings from the pain he caused. The other woman finally understood she was not invincible. She had counted on the bride's silence, her patience, her fear of conflict. But the bride had risen from the ashes of betrayal. She no longer trembled, no longer whispered, no longer yielded. The husband felt panic. He had lost the control he had always assumed was his. He realized, too late, that love alone cannot repair years of neglect and betrayal. Actions mattered, choices mattered, and he had made them all wrong. The bride, once invisible, now stood at the center of her life. She had survived, she had fought, and she had reclaimed herself. Whatever came next, she would not be the shadow anymore. She would no longer live in the space of someone else's laughter. She would live for herself. The quiet strength that had grown inside her was tested that night. She had prepared for a confrontation, but nothing could prepare her for what came next. Her husband returned with the other woman, laughing, carefree, unaware that she had changed. "Clara," he said softly, trying to reach her with words she no longer felt. "Can we talk?" She shook her head. "There's nothing to talk about. I am done waiting for words I will never hear." The other woman smiled, as if victory were hers. But Clara no longer feared her. She had learned that no one could take her life, her heart, or her self-worth without her permission. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She doubled over, clutching herself, and her husband froze. Panic swept across his face, but it was too late. She had been carrying a secret, one that had grown quietly alongside her pain. She was pregnant, and the life inside her was hers alone. Fear gripped her, but so did determination. She called for a doctor immediately, insisting on privacy. The hospital became a place of solitude, where she could process what had happened and what might come. The doctors confirmed her pregnancy 3 weeks along, and her heart swelled with hope and terror. She knew she had to protect herself and her child. The betrayal she had endured could not touch them. She would not allow her silence or patience to destroy another life. In her quiet room, she made a plan. No more waiting, no more enduring. She would act, not for him, but for herself and the life growing inside her. Outside, the world continued. He was unaware of the news, lost in laughter and carelessness with the other woman. She realized then that she had been invisible for too long. But she was invisible no more. The day came when she confronted him fully. She told him everything about her pain, her endurance, and the pregnancy. His face paled, and he stammered apologies she no longer needed. He tried to explain, to make excuses, to claim ignorance. But Clara knew the truth. His love had never been enough, and his choices had been deliberate. "I am not your shadow anymore," she said. I am not a placeholder. I am a woman, and I will live for myself and my child. Whatever comes next, I choose me. He could only watch, helpless, as the woman he had ignored for years became unshakable. The other woman's laughter faded as she realized she could never replace what Clara had reclaimed: her voice, her power, her life. The hospital visit became a turning point. Clara recovered, and the baby inside her was safe. She began reclaiming her world, her independence, her friends, and her dignity. She filed for divorce quietly, firmly, ensuring that no manipulation could derail her. Her mother wept, but then hugged her tightly, finally understanding the battles Clara had fought silently. She had endured, yes, but now she would thrive. She had learned that silence is not always virtue, and endurance without respect is nothing. Meanwhile, her husband faced the consequences of years of neglect. The home felt empty without Clara, and he finally realized the weight of every choice he had made. But for Clara, it was too late for regret. Years later, Clara stood at the entrance of her foundation's charity Bala network she co-founded to support women who had endured betrayal, pregnancy loss, and silence. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, stronger than ever. Across the room, her former husband noticed her. His eyes widened, but she felt nothing. No pain, no anger, no longing. She had reclaimed her life fully. She smiled at the women around her, the ones she had helped, and walked past him. For the first time in her life, Clara was free. Free from silence, free from betrayal, and free from a life that never truly belonged to her. She had survived, endured, and emerged victorious. She was not a shadow. She was a woman who had found her voice, and nothing could take that away. The crowd cheered softly, unaware of the silent battles fought behind the smiles. But Clara knew the truth. Some victories are quiet, some battles invisible, but the strength they leave behind is everlasting.